What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and normally RX 588 gigabytes go for about $150 on eBay, but I picked up this quote-unquote broken one for only $65 shipped. Is this card actually broken? If it is, can I even fix it? And how does an RX 580 perform in 2022? Well, let's find out. So now that the crypto bubble has begun to burst, eBay has been flooded with cheap graphics cards, which is amazing. When looking for cards on eBay, I usually filter out the ones listed as for parts or not working, as most of the time they're completely broken trash and not worth trying to mess with. With that being said, I check every once in a while to see if I can find anything for super cheap that's either mislabeled or easily fixable. One of my recent times looking for cheap graphics cards, I stumbled across this listing which caught my eye. It was an RX 580 8GB with an auction price below $50, and there were a few things that caught my eye in the listing that made me think this card was in fact working or just needed a quick fix to get it up and running at 100%. The first thing was the top line of the description, which read, "This card is an enigma to me. It will drive video but then show as a dead card in the management software I use to watch my crypto miners." This was a pretty good sign, but what really sold me was the video attached to the listing.
Alright, I'm going to sell this card as parts, although it, you see, it's not registering here. It says the card is dead a little bit, or says it's dead. It ran for a while, then registered as dead. Both fans are rolling, and I follow the HDMI card, or the HDMI cable around. You can see it is indeed driving the video. Those green stripes are my monitor. Hold on, there it is, see it? So that card is driving video, but it doesn't mine. So I don't know if it games either, because, you know, I don't game. I don't have a gaming deck or a gaming system to put it on. But it was driving that video, and there it is, still running in there. So I'm gonna sell that one as parts.
As you can see, showing the card outputting video with no artifacting, leading me to believe the problem was something software, driver, or BIOS related, all of which would be easy to deal with. So with a fair amount of confidence in my ability to get this card working, I bid on and eventually won the auction. In the end, I won the card for about $52 with about $15 for shipping. All in all, $65 for an RX 580 8GB is a steal, and worst case scenario, I could just resell it for parts if I couldn't get it to work. So after submitting my payment, I waited about a week for the package to arrive on my doorstep. Now normally I don't show packaging or unboxings for this kind of stuff, but this one was so weird I felt like I had to. So what showed up was a slightly beat up USPS flat rate box, but instead of printing a label, this guy used stamps. Like 20 stamps, which I thought was pretty funny. Not a positive or a negative, I just have never seen a package like this shipped with stamps. Opening it up, the box contained some crumpled up coupons for padding, which I actually like a lot because he reused what would have otherwise been thrown out, and it works fine for padding. All these crumpled up papers surrounded a brown paper Whole Foods bag. Opening this up, I could feel the card itself along with some sort of block or something. Pulling it out, I found the RX 580 along with, wait for it, the Book of Mormon. If you don't know, this is the religious text of the Latter Day Saint movement, and I'm not really sure what the seller's end goal was with sending this to me. I guess he's trying to spread his religion. I'm not really interested and will likely just donate this, but I have to say this is the weirdest graphics card unboxing I've ever done. Putting aside all the packing material and my newly acquired religious text, it was finally time to take a look at the card itself. On first inspection, it was about what I expected from a used mining card. It overall looked in good condition, but there were some minor cosmetic scratches and a light coating of dust. With that being said, I've seen much worse, and the physical condition of this card was more than acceptable to me. This version of the RX 580 is the XFX GTS model, which features a pretty nice dual fan design with a metal backplate, plenty of copper heat pipes, and overall is a design I like a lot. Like I said before, this is the 8GB model, which this card can take advantage of that much video memory in some games. The only other thing to note about this card's condition is it came with a labeled piece of blue tape stating the model and what I'm assuming is the model number. With the initial inspection out of the way, it was time for the moment of truth. I pulled out my test bench, plugged in the card, attached an 8-pin PCIe power cable, plugged in the system, and turned it on by jumping the power pins on the bottom of the board. It took a second to power on, but sure enough, the card booted right up into Windows with no issues. But I knew there was still work to do to get this card ready for gaming, and until you actually put the card under a full load, it's hard to tell if there are actually any issues with it. The first thing I wanted to check was to make sure the system was recognizing the card correctly. Opening up Device Manager, under Display Adapters, it showed right up as an RX 580. Now, one thing to look out for when buying a card that was used for mining is the BIOS that's flashed to it. Many mining cards have been flashed with a special BIOS that make the card better for mining crypto, but will in many cases hurt gaming performance. This is a simple fix. You just go to Tech Power Up, grab the BIOS flashing tool, the correct BIOS for your card, and run the program. To find out what BIOS this card had, I opened up GPU-Z, and to my surprise, it was running the standard BIOS that comes with the card, meaning a BIOS flash was unnecessary, and it was looking like I snagged a perfectly good RX 580 for only $65. So after installing the graphics drivers, I loaded up Borderlands 3 to check out temps. On my open air bench, the card was maxing out at about 77 degrees Celsius, which isn't bad, but before running full benchmarks, I still wanted to change out the thermal paste and clean up the card a bit. I pulled the card off the bench and started by separating the PCB from the cooler. Opening it up, I found a slightly dusty board and a lot of thermal paste. It's generally hard to use too much thermal paste, but in this case, I do think this is pushing it. With that being said, it looks like a relatively fresh application, but I think we can do better. I started by cleaning the old paste off the cooler, then the GPU die. I didn't go crazy trying to get every little bit, but I got most of it. Then I moved on to separating the backplate and shroud from the cooler and PCB. Next, I gave each piece a light cleaning with some Q-tips and isopropyl alcohol, as well as blew out the heatsink with some compressed air. Then I could just reassemble the card, along with adding a fresh application of thermal paste. Again, this wasn't a super deep cleaning, and if you're interested in deep cleaning your own GPU, I would recommend watching Greg Salazar's video on the topic, which I'll link in the description below. When it was all done, the card was looking a bit better, but the more important thing to me was seeing if temps had improved at all. Throwing the card back onto the bench and running 2 cycles of the Borderlands 3 benchmark, I found the temps dropped by about 7 degrees Celsius, which is a pretty significant dip in my opinion. If you're buying a used card, changing the thermal paste is a very good idea, because as you can see in this example, even though the old application was pretty fresh, doing a new application with a more appropriate amount of thermal paste did help temps a bit. So how does an RX 580 perform in 2022? Well, to test it, I wanted to go with what I consider a very realistic pairing. I honestly don't care how this card pairs with something like a Ryzen 9 or i9, so I decided to pair it with a Ryzen 5 5500, a $130-ish CPU. Our Ryzen 5 is sitting in the Gigabyte B450M DS3H with 16 GB of 3600 MHz DDR4 RAM. Again, this card will perform better with a more high-end CPU, but I personally like to test more realistic configurations, as you could put together a 5500 and RX 580 system for $500 or less, depending on how much you deal hunt. So without further ado, here are the gaming benchmarks. As you can see, the RX 588GB performs really well in 2022 at 1080p resolution. Sure, some games like Cyberpunk are pushing this card to its limits, but still offer a very playable experience. All in all, I consider this a complete success, and this is really just meant to show you what kind of deal you can get if you're consistently searching and willing to get a little creative. Obviously, I got pretty lucky with this and normally wouldn't recommend buying a card listed for parts, but again, I had a good bit of confidence after thoroughly inspecting the listing. My best suggestion for buying used hardware is to only buy from experienced sellers with a good bit of feedback, and to always read the listing as thoroughly as possible so there are no surprises when your part arrives. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this card and on buying used mining cards in general. Do you think it's a good idea, or do you steer clear of it? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, and as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.